If you're studying for the INBDE, I highly recommend INBDE Bootcamp, an all-in-one study resource that will help you pass your exam. Use coupon code MENTALDENTAL for 10% off. Hey everyone, Dr. Ryan here, and welcome back to our Biostatistics series. I'm excited to present 10 practice questions from this first chapter of the Biostatistics series because I think there's so much here that is important and relevant to know for your board exam, whether it's the INBDE or the ADAT or the AFK. Biostatistics is a really popular and also really difficult section. And so I want to make sure we have an opportunity before we get too far into it to test what you've learned up to this point. And just so you know what's coming up for the future of this series, this first chapter has basically been an introduction to the topic. The next chapter that we'll dive into is going to be all about study design, the types of studies and things of that nature. And then the final chapter will be on data interpretation, where we talk about the measurements and statistical significance, what a forest plot is, all of that good stuff. So this will be the part 1 of our practice questions for biostatistics, covering the first 4 videos of this series. So practice question number 1. Consider the following research question. Does using an electric toothbrush reduce plaque accumulation and gingivitis more effectively than using a manual toothbrush in adults after 3 months? Using the PICO framework, what is the I in this study? So go ahead, pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. All right, so PICO, of course, is the acronym that we use to formulate clinical research questions. And so P is our population, patient, or problem. I is the intervention. C is the comparison or control. And O is the outcome. So we can do this quickly in our research question here. We have adults, which is our P, so we can rule out answer choice C. We have a reduction in plaque accumulation and gingivitis after a period of 3 months. So that is most closely representative of our answer choice D, so we could rule that out as well. And we're left with I and C, our intervention and our comparison, which happen to be the last 2 answer choices we have here. So an electric toothbrush is the intervention that we're using and comparing to the manual toothbrush. So the electric toothbrush is going to be our intervention because we're assessing if it's more effective than comparing to the manual toothbrush use. So the I in this study is going to be answer choice A, using an electric toothbrush. Practice question number 2. Which of the finer criteria is related to IRB approval? And IRB standing for Institutional Review Board. So go ahead and pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. So the finer criteria is an acronym used to assess the quality of a research question. And all of the finer criteria are listed out in order as the answer choices. I would also, of course, memorize what the acronym stands for in case they just straight up ask you, what does the N stand for in the finer criteria, or what does the R stand for example? But in this question, we're trying to figure out which one has to do with approval by the Institutional Review Board. Well, this is responsible for assessing the ethical nature of a paper, whether it's fair and considering the rights of all the human subjects. And so IRB approval is necessary for all papers that are going to include human subjects before that paper is published. So the correct answer for this question is D, ethical. Practice question number 3. Which section of a research paper often includes information about future research? So go ahead and pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. So for a brief review, the introduction section is providing background information about the topic that we're discussing in the study and in the paper. The methods section describes how the study was conducted in very exact terms. The discussion section interprets the findings of our study, and the conclusion section answers the original research question that was posed in the abstract and also at the end of the introduction. And so the best answer for this one is the discussion section. This is where we interpret the results, but we also explain their significance and place them in the context of existing knowledge. This section outlines gaps in knowledge, questions that remain unanswered, and areas that could benefit from future research. So the answer to this question is C. Practice question number 4. Which of the following is an ordinal variable? So go ahead and pause the video, think through this one, and then we'll go over it together. Alright, so now we're covering topics from the second video in the series on variables. So here we have eye color, blood type, zip code, and socioeconomic status. Well, first, eye color is a variable that has many different values. It could be brown, blue, green, hazel, gray, amber, but those are not ranked in any particular way. There's no order to those eye colors, so that is a nominal variable, not an ordinal variable. Blood type is the same. It has multiple different options, AB, AB, and O, but there's no rank or priority or significant order to those. So B is also a nominal variable. And then we have zip code, which could be many different options. And again, there's no order to them. Even though they are technically numbers, there's no order to those numbers. And so C is also a nominal variable. And lastly, we have D, socioeconomic status, which is ranked from low, middle to high. So there is a meaning behind the ranking or an order to those values. And so D is an ordinal variable and the correct answer as well. Practice question number 5. Which of the following statistics can be applied to nominal data? So go ahead, pause the video, think through this one, and then we'll go over it together. So the 3 main types of descriptive statistics, which we're going to review in much more detail later, are frequency distribution, central tendency, which includes mean and median, and variability of a data set, which includes standard deviation. But I did mention these topics in a table where we talked about nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio variables. And as you go from left to right in that table, you have more and more possible statistics that you're able to use with those variables and the values that they bring. And so nominal is going to be the most restrictive of all of that data. For example, in order to calculate the median, you need at least ordinal data. Ordinal, interval, or ratio will suffice, but nominal doesn't work. Just think about if you had blood type as an example. You can't have A on one end and then AB on the other end, and then you have O in the center. And so there's no way to calculate a true median or any kind of central tendency of that data set. And then even more so, we need at least interval data to have a mean or a standard deviation, because then we need actual numbers that you can add together and divide and do all sorts of things with. So mean and standard deviation need at least interval, if not ratio variables involved. And so all of those are ruled out, as then is E. So we're left with A, frequency distribution, which is the only statistic, the only descriptive statistic that you can calculate from nominal data. So the answer choice that is correct for this one is A. Practice question number 6. You have the following researchable question that you'd like to pursue with a clinical study. Is mandibular fracture more likely to occur during a bisagittal split osteotomy if third molars are present? Evidence indicates that fractures in general are more likely to happen in females and as individuals age. So which of the following would be the predictor variable in your study? So go ahead and pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. So the topic here is once again variables. This time we're considering more the operationalization of those variables. What is the predictor variable in our proposed study question? And interestingly, we did some background research here. We got some evidence from previous studies that may influence the outcome of our study. So we're already considering some possible research bias here, which is a great first step to designing a powerful research study. Now you can see with the question here, I called it a researchable question because it's not really a research question in terms of the PICO framework. We don't have a population, for example, specified, but that's okay. This is the first step of a nascent research project. And so you can see that everyone that we're looking at here is going to have a bisagittal split osteotomy. Otherwise, the research really isn't going to work at all. So a BSSO here is basically a constant. All of the human subjects would have this and nothing changes about it. So this is not a variable at all. We can rule out A from the possible choices. Remember back to my diagram with the watering can, the plant, and the sun. So the watering can was our independent variable. It was the thing that the researcher could manipulate. This is also called the predictor variable, which is what we're looking for here. So what we can control is if third molars are present or not. So we'll basically, if I'm designing this research project, have two separate treatment groups, one with third molars and one with third molars extracted. And then all of those subjects in both treatment groups would undergo the BSSO. Granted, that's what they're going to have done anyway, so they're going to be included in the research project. So the predictor variable, the thing that is going to change that we can manipulate, is whether or not they have third molars present. So that is our predictor variable. Now, just to take this all the way through, the outcome variable or the dependent variable is the plant. What's going to change as a result of manipulating this part. And so that's going to be whether or not mandibular fracture happens. Of course, we hope there's no mandibular fracture, but sometimes it is a side effect. So that is going to be the outcome variable in this study. And then we had mentioned from previous studies that the sex of the patient and their age could potentially impact the incidence of mandibular fracture. And so these I would consider as confounding variables, like the sun in our plant study example from the second video in this series. So sex of the patient, age of the patient, maybe ethnicity of the patient, all of these are possible confounding variables in this study. So again, predictor variable is presence or absence of third molars, which is the correct answer. Outcome variable is mandibular fracture. Confounding variable is age of the patient. And then the BSSO procedure is simply a constant in this study design. Practice question number 7. Which of the following is the strongest sampling method? Go ahead and pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. So now we're talking about content from the third video in the series on sampling and allocation. And there I talked about how sampling is selecting individuals from a population to be included in your study sample. And then allocation after that is how those sampled individuals are assigned into different groups. So for sampling, of course, if we could do a census where we can include everyone in the target population, that would be awesome, but usually it's not possible. So the strongest sampling method from there is one that involves random sampling, and that would be a probability sample. So the answer for this one is, in fact, answer choice C. The other ones are non-random sampling, which isn't quite as strong. Sometimes it's easier, but they are weaker sampling methods. Consecutive is the best of the non-random. That's where you take individuals in a certain order as they come into an event or a room or a clinic. Convenience is picking people because they're just present, they're easy to get, like people at a dental convention or in a classroom. And then judgmental is the last one. This is where it's really biased because you're intentionally picking people who are easy to work with or trusted friends or family or colleagues, people you know who aren't going to drop out of the research study so they can be reliable subjects. That would be definitely the weakest sampling method on the list. But again, the answer for this question is C. Practice question number 8. So I'm going to let you guys pause the video and read through this one on your own. Take your time, think through the answer choices, and then we'll go over it together. So here we have a research study that's evaluating the efficacy of a new fluoride mouthwash compared to a placebo mouthwash. So this is a pretty classic design for what would be considered a randomized control trial. We'll talk more about those study designs in the next chapter of this series. But all we need to know here and all we're being asked is the sampling and allocation method that would be best to ensure that the study results are generalizable and applicable to the target population of teenagers. So when we look at these answer choices, some of what we talked about in the last question applies here as well. So we're really looking for the most random sampling and random allocation methods to help get the strongest study design and minimize possible bias. So for this one, I would just rule out all of the answer choices that involve something that's not random. So for example, convenience sampling is not random. Convenience sampling again is not random. And then we have non-random allocation down here, which could be by convenience or by clinician choice. And so we're left with answer choice B, which involves both simple random sampling and random allocation. So that would be definitely the strongest sampling and allocation design of the list. So the correct answer for this one is B. Practice question number 9. Which of the following strategies is best suited to reduce the potential for recall bias? We'll go ahead and pause the video, think through this question, and then we'll go over it together. So now these last two questions are going to have to do with the fourth video in the series on research bias. So if you remember my memory tip for this one, recall is most common for retrospective studies because the subjects are being asked to recall something from the past. So the best way to minimize this type of bias is to reduce the amount of time between when something happened and when they're being asked about it. So that would be answer choice C, decreasing the time from the exposure to the follow-up. The exposure being when something happened to them, the follow-up being when they're asked about it. So the answer for this one is C. Just for review purposes, randomization is best to help reduce confounding bias, blinding is best to reduce expectation bias, and calculating age-adjusted survival rates, that's actually the strategy to reduce lead time bias. So all of these methods are actually great for reducing bias in your study, but C is the one specifically for recall bias. And finally, practice question number 10. Which type of bias does the Hawthorne effect fall under? Go ahead, pause the video, think through this one, and then we'll go over it together. So the Hawthorne effect is a type of human behavior in which individuals modify their behavior in response to an awareness of being involved in a research study. So this is most closely associated with observer bias, where study participants behave differently knowing that they're being observed in a study. So how'd you do? Let me know in the comments how many of those 10 practice questions that you got correct. Thank you so much for watching this video and watching this series so far. I'm looking forward to continuing with the next video on types of studies. So until next time, keep working hard, and if you need to, feel free to go back to some of those earlier videos in this biostatistics series to clarify some topics or areas based on how you did with the practice questions so that you have a very clear, perfect understanding before diving into deeper areas of biostatistics. So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for watching. That's it for this video lecture. Thank you so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate it. I'd also really appreciate if you consider clicking that like button below this video, subscribing to the channel if you have not already, sharing this video with your friends, and leaving a comment below letting me know what you thought. All of those things can really help to grow the channel. If you want to go above and beyond supporting me and what I do here, please check out the Patreon page linked below. If you want to join there, you'll get access to exclusive practice questions, exclusive study guides, a Discord server, and so much more. And if you see at the end of my videos, I have an end credits screen, and all of those names there are the names of my amazing Patreon supporters that I'm honored to have. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.